And here I am for Frankenstein part 3. Sorry, just watching the seconds tick by up in the corner. They went backwards for a minute. I don't like that. Yeah, everything's fine. Sometimes it would be nice to ask somebody else if they could see what I'm seeing right now. But that looks fine. Okay. Now, I'm starting very suddenly, without warning. So, gonna post that I'm there. Here we go. Oh, brother, here we go again. Oh no, Nick. It's okay. Hi, Danny. Just let the story wash over you with all the words in it. You can understand words later on. Hello, sweetie. Do you want to come up here and say hi to the people? Nivy's here. She's they're running a little bit low on food. This is a chick. I haven't drunk anything in about 2 years, I think. Just hangover's just not worth it. Come on, sweetie. You gonna come up? Oh, I think you'll have to jump all the way up for it. No, okay. There it is. She's not coming up. You can go up there. Okay, you go up there and have your milk treat. Hello. Hello, my love. Where's your milk treat? It's a little heart. What's that? Is she going to get... No, she's being gentle. You don't like it? You don't like it? Oh. Poor little girl. I'll have to give her a treat she does like. Huh. Sad. I know. I was hoping to get her sitting up on the side of the couch, but alas, life is not tidy. Hello. Look at the people. Oh, you are my hideous creation, aren't you? Yes. Well, to be fair, when you feed and love a skinny cat, you're pretty much just going to get a larger cat. Didn't really create her as such. Okay, so last time on Frankenstein, I don't remember. Yeah, life is a carnival of the opposite of delights. But, you know, it is what it is. And at least we're not Victor Frankenstein, because last time Frankenstein is starting from his earliest childhood. He's starting from his parents' marriage to explain who he is. And he read Paracelsus and Albertus Magnus, and his father just said, you know, that's not science, throw it away, rather than that's not science, this is. So he's pissed about that. And he started studying mathematics instead of alchemy, I guess. Oh yeah, the captain is so in love with Victor. He thought he was so handsome. He's the only guy who will listen to this entire life story. without going, dude, I just want to know why you were on the ice in the Arctic Circle on a sled, chasing a monster on a different sled. But the captain's like, oh, tell me more. How did your grandparents meet? So with his with Victor's abandonment of the alchemical sciences. Exactly. He's abandoned alchemy and concentrated on mathematics. And the end of the chapter was him saying it was a strong effort of the spirit of good, but it was ineffectual. Destiny was too potent, and her immutable laws had decreed my utter and terrible destruction. It's good, isn't it? It's like a fancy thesaurus version of really bad Star Wars dialogue. Or Star Wars dialogue. Do you want to go outside, my love? He won't shut my... he won't fix my door. I mean, it still works. It's fine. Okay, we are almost ready to begin because we don't have a lot of story to recap. Keep taking my temperature in case I have a fever. I don't have a fever. I just haven't drunk enough water today. I am both a hypochondriac and the caregiver who is just sick of their shit. I'm both, guys. Right. Don't really want to start until 10 minutes in, just to be consistent. But just check my DMs. Which are all deeply crazy. It's because my display name on Twitter at the moment is Mike Pence's first wife, Lilith, which is a joke. But I get sent all these DM requests and get put into all these groups about how the President Cheeto is a traitor. What? Okay. I don't want this. It's better than all the 420 groups I was tagged in before. Still am. Okay. Now that we're situated, and if anything, we've lost a viewer. So that's fun. I'm just going to start the chapter. I mean, we're still talking about Victor's childhood. So, Frankenstein, Chapter 3. When I had attained the age of 17, my parents resolved that I should become a student at the University of Ingolstadt. I had hitherto attended the schools of Geneva, but my father thought it necessary for the completion of my education that I should be made acquainted with other customs than those of my native country. My departure was therefore fixed at an early date, but before the day resolved upon could arrive, the first misfortune of my life occurred, an omen, as it were, of my future misery. His first misfortune happened when he was 17. Not exactly crying for you, Vic. Elizabeth had caught the scarlet fever. Her illness was severe, and she was in the greatest danger. During her illness, many arguments have been urged to persuade my mother to refrain from attending upon her. Yes, the one you feed is the one who's stronger, but I'm feeding them both because I want things to get out of hand. Did you catch the beginning, Danny? It was like 2 sentences. Yes, Elizabeth has a scarlet fever. During her illness, many arguments have been urged to persuade my mother to refrain from attending upon her. She had at first yielded to our entreaties, but when she heard that the life of her favourite was menaced, she could no longer control her anxiety. Same. Oh, cool. She attended her sick bed. Her watchful attentions triumphed over the malignity of the distemper. Elizabeth was saved, but the consequences of this imprudence were fatal to her preserver. On the third day, my mother sickened. Her fever was accompanied by the most alarming symptoms, and the looks of her medical attendants prognosticated the worst event. On her deathbed, the fortitude and benignity. I can handle malignity, but benignity? Fuck you, Mary. I'm sorry, Mary, you had a rough life, but come on. Of this best of women did not desert her. She joined the hands of Elizabeth and myself. My children, she said, my firmest hopes of future happiness were placed on the prospect of your union. This expectation will now be the consolation of your father. Elizabeth, my love, you must supply my place to my younger children. Alas, I regret that I am taken from you, and happy and beloved as I have been, is it not hard to quit you all? But these are not thoughts befitting me. I will endeavour to resign myself cheerfully to death, and will indulge a hope of meeting you in another world. Yeah, you know, sometimes you adopt a little girl so that your son can marry her one day. I'm so sorry that this is coming up again. I know, I feel bad yelling at Mary Shelley. Oh, poor Mrs. Frankenstein. I am dying, and my only comfort is that 2 of my kids are going to marry each other. And presumably, fuck. I'm sorry. Is this Game of Thrones? Game of Frankenthrones. She died calmly, and her countenance expressed affection even in death. I need not describe the feelings of those whose dearest ties are rent by that most irreparable evil. The void that presents itself to the soul, and the despair that is exhibited on the countenance. It is so long before the mind can persuade itself that she whom we saw every day, and whose very existence appeared a part of our own, can have departed forever, that the brightness of a beloved eye can have been extinguished, and the sound of a voice so familiar and dear to the ear can be hushed, never more to be heard. These are the reflections of the first days. But when the lapse of time proves the reality of the evil, then the actual bitterness of grief commences. Yet from whom has not that rude hand rent away some dear connection? And why should I describe a sorrow which all have felt and must feel? The time at length arrives when grief is rather an indulgence than a necessity. And the smile that plays upon the lips, although it may be deemed a sacrilege, is not banished. My mother was dead, but we had still duties which we ought to perform. We must continue our course with the rest, and learn to think ourselves fortunate, whilst one remains whom the spoiler has not seized. Damn. I mean, she's not talking about her own mother here, because Mary Wollstonecraft died in childbirth, so... But, Mary lost everybody. She could be talking about anybody. Probably not me, because, well, we never met, and I'm alive. So she could be talking about anyone apart from me. My departure for Ingolstadt, which had been deferred by these events, was now again determined upon. I obtained from my father a respite of some weeks. It appeared to me sacrilege so soon to leave the repose, akin to death, of the house of mourning, and to rush into the thick of life. I was new to sorrow, but it did not the less alarm me. I was unwilling to quit the sight of those that remained to me, and above all, I desired to see my sweet Elizabeth in some degree consoled. She indeed veiled her grief and strove to act the comforter to us all. She looked steadily on life, and assumed its duties with courage and zeal. She devoted herself to those whom she had been taught to call her uncle and cousins, because we lived in a fucked up time. Never was she so enchanting as at this time, when she recalled the sunshine of her smiles and spent them upon us. She forgot even her own regret in her endeavours to make us forget. Which I doubt. I doubt that, Victor. The day of my departure at length arrived. Clerval spent the last evening with us. I forgot about Henry Clerval. He's in love with Victor. Well, that's what I think anyway. That's right. Yep. Clerval spent the last evening with us. He had endeavoured to persuade his father to permit him to accompany me and to become my fellow student, but in vain. His father was a narrow-minded trader and saw idleness and ruin in the aspirations and ambition of his son. It's the sunshine of her smile. She even forgot her own grief in helping us out. No, she didn't. Vic, she didn't. She didn't. The female brain can have 2 ideas in it at once, sometimes 3. Never more than 5 in a lifetime. That's what killed Marie Curie. Henry deeply felt the misfortune of being debarred from a liberal education. He said little, but when he spoke, I read in his kindling eye and in his animated glance a restrained but firm resolve not to be chained to the miserable details of commerce. Oh, la-di-da. We sat late. We could not tear ourselves away from each other, nor persuade ourselves to say the word farewell. It was said, and we retired under the pretence of seeking repose, each fancying that the other was deceived. But when at morning's dawn I descended to the carriage which was to convey me away, they were all there. My father again to bless me, Clerval to press my hand once more, my Elizabeth to renew her entreaties that I would write often, and to bestow the last feminine attentions on her playmate and friend. Elizabeth renewed her entreaties and bestowed the last feminine attentions on her playmate and friend, Victor Frankenstein, and hoped that he would write often. It doesn't matter. It's just a sentence that's annoying me, the way it's put together. I threw myself into the chaise that was to convey me away and indulged in the most melancholy reflections. I, who had ever been surrounded by amiable companions, continually engaged in endeavouring to bestow mutual pleasure, I was now alone. In the university whither I was going, I must form my own friends and be my own protector. My life had hitherto been remarkably secluded and domestic, and this had given me invincible repugnance to new countenances. I loved my brothers, Elizabeth and Clerval. These were old familiar faces, but I believed myself totally unfitted for the company of strangers. Such were my reflections as I commenced my journey, but as I proceeded, my spirits and hopes rose. I ardently desired the acquisition of knowledge. I had often, when at home, thought it hard to remain during my youth cooped up in one place, and had longed to enter the world and take my station among other human beings. Now my desires were complied with, and it would indeed have been folly to repent. Fair. I had sufficient leisure for these and many other reflections during my journey to Ingolstadt, which was long and fatiguing. At length the high white steeple of the town met my eyes. I alighted and was conducted to my solitary apartment to spend the evening as I pleased. I had a German teacher who made sure we pronounced the German the way, I don't even know if that's the way to pronounce it, but she was very firm on the subject. And at university, I did a military history paper, and the brigadier taught us all to say lieutenant. And now that's just how I say it, and it sounds really like I'm up myself. But the brigadier made me. He hypnotized me somehow. That's what I think it is when someone actually succeeds in teaching me something and I listen. I feel like it's a form of hypnotism and I kind of resent it. The next morning, I delivered my letters of introduction and paid a visit to some of the principal professors. Chance, or rather the evil influence, the angel of destruction, which asserted omnipotent sway over me from the moment I turned my reluctant steps from my father's door, led me first to Mr. Kremp, or Master Kremp, maybe, Professor of Natural Philosophy. He was an uncouth man, but deeply imbued in the secrets of his science. He asked me several questions concerning my progress in the different branches of science appertaining to natural philosophy. I replied carelessly, and partly in contempt mentioned the names of my alchemists as the principal authors I had studied. The professor stared. "Have you," he said, "really spent your time in studying such nonsense?" I replied in the affirmative. "Every minute," continued Mr. Crimp with warmth, "every instant that you have wasted on those books is utterly and entirely lost. You have burdened your memory with exploded systems and useless names. Good God, in what desert land have you lived when no one was kind enough to inform you that these fancies, which you have so greedily imbibed, are 1,000 years old and as musty as they are ancient? I little expected in this enlightened and scientific age to find a disciple of Albertus Magnus and Paracelsus. My dear sir, you must begin your studies entirely anew." Sounds like when, one of those alt-right guys writes down a fact he thinks he knows about history. That's kind of what everyone feels. So saying, he stepped aside and wrote down a list of several books treating of natural philosophy, which he desired me to procure, and dismissed me after mentioning that in the beginning of the following week he intended to commence a course of lectures upon natural philosophy and its general relations, and that Mr. Waldman, a fellow professor, would lecture upon chemistry the alternate days that he omitted. I returned home not disappointed, for I have said that I had long considered those authors useless whom the professor reprobated, but I returned not at all the more inclined to recur to these studies in any shape. Mr. Kremp was a little squat man with a gruff voice and a repulsive countenance. The teacher, therefore, did not prepossess me in favour of his pursuits. Victor is complaining because his lecturers aren't hot enough. Wow, he really is a first-year student. God bless him. In rather a too philosophical and connected a strain, perhaps, I've given an account of the conclusions I had come to concerning them in my early years. As a child, I had not been content with the results promised by the modern professors of natural science. With a confusion of ideas only to be accounted for by my extreme youth and my want of a guide on such matters, I had retrod the steps of knowledge along the paths of time, and exchanged the discoveries of recent inquirers for the dreams of forgotten alchemists. Besides, I had a contempt for the uses of modern natural philosophy. It was very different when the masters of the science sought immortality and power. Such views, although futile, were grand. But now the scene was changed. Saying a scene, it's a goddamn arms race. That's what I heard, though. The ambition of the inquirer seemed to limit itself to the annihilation of those visions on which my interest in science was chiefly founded. I was required to exchange chimeras of boundless grandeur for realities of little worth. Oh, it's like every high school kid who used to be on Facebook for like, I fucking love science, and then they actually get to school and have to learn about the scientific method and stuff, and they hate it. Hilarious. It's good to me. Such were my reflections during the first 2 or 3 days of my residence at Ingolstadt, which were chiefly spent in becoming acquainted with the localities and the principal residents in my new abode. But as the ensuing week commenced, I thought of the information which Mr. Kremp had given me concerning the lectures. And although I could not consent to go and hear that little conceited fellow deliver sentences out of a pulpit, I recollected what he had said of Mr. Waldman, whom I had never seen, as he had hitherto been out of town. All these details are really useful to the story. They're all extremely Very, very necessary. Partly from curiosity and partly from idleness, I went into the lecturing room, which Mr. Waldman entered shortly after. This professor was very unlike his colleague. He appeared about 50 years of age, but with an aspect expressive of the greatest benevolence. A few grey hairs covered his temples, but those at the back of his head were nearly black. His person was short, but remarkably erect, and his voice the sweetest I had ever heard. He began his lecture by a recapitulation of the history of chemistry and the various improvements made by different men of learning, pronouncing with fervour the names of the most distinguished discoverers. He then took a cursory view of the present state of the science and explained many of its elementary terms. After having made a few preparatory experiments, he concluded with a panegyric upon modern chemistry, the terms of which I shall never forget. This one is hot enough to listen to. The ancient teachers of this science, said he, promised impossibilities and performed nothing. The modern masters promise very little. They know that metals cannot be transmuted and that the elixir of life is a chimera, but these philosophers, whose hands seem only made to dabble in dirt and their eyes to pore over the microscope or crucible, have indeed performed miracles. They penetrate into the recesses of nature and show how she works in her hiding places. They ascend into the heavens. They have discovered how the blood circulates and the nature of the air we breathe. They have acquired new and almost unlimited powers. They can command the thunders of heaven, mimic the earthquake, and even mock the invisible world with its own shadows. Such were the professor's words, rather let me say such the words of the fate, announced to destroy me. As he went on, I felt as if my soul were grappling with a palpable enemy. One by one, the various keys were touched which formed the mechanism of my being. Chord after chord was sounded, and soon my mind was filled with but one thought, one conception, one purpose. So much has been done, exclaimed the soul of Frankenstein. More, far more will I achieve. Treading in the steps already marked, I will pioneer a new way, explore unknown powers, and unfold to the world the deepest mysteries of creation. Okay, so Victor has just arrived at university. He was going to go, but Elizabeth got scarlet fever, and then his mother was not supposed to nurse her, but she did, and Elizabeth recovered, but the mother died. It was very sad. His best friend / boyfriend, Henry Clerval, he's not allowed to go to university because his dad's a merchant and wants him to do merching. And, well, obviously Elizabeth's not going. So he's just gone there, and they've made fun of his alchemy studies and talked to him about real science. And here we are. Pretty easy to recap. It hasn't been going on for that long. Yes, I did this eyeshadow for the brunch today that did not for me transpire. That's okay. Oh, also, Mrs. Frankenstein, her last comfort in this world was knowing that her two children would marry each other. It's Victor and Lizzie. Oh, we love to see it. I closed not my eyes that night. My internal being was in a state of insurrection and turmoil. I felt that order would thence arise, but I had no power to produce it. By degrees, after the morning's dawn, sleep came. I awoke, and my yesternight's thoughts were as a dream. There only remained a resolution to return to my ancient studies and to devote myself to a science for which I believed myself to possess a natural talent. Yeah, one of them was adopted. On the understanding that she would marry Victor eventually. You could do that back then. Pretty gross. On the same day, I paid Mr. Waldman a visit. His manners in private were even more mild and attractive than in public, for there was a certain dignity in his mien during his lecture, which in his own house was replaced by the greatest affability and kindness. Victor finds one of his professors ugly, but he finds the other one very attractive, even though he's short. He's short but very erect. I think that's worth pointing out. I gave him pretty nearly the same account of my former pursuits as I had given to his fellow professor. He heard with attention the little narration concerning my studies, and smiled at the names of Cornelius Agrippa and Paracelsus, but without the contempt that Mr. Kremp had exhibited. He said, these were men to whose indefatigable zeal modern philosophers were indebted for most of the foundations of their knowledge. They had left to us as an easier task to give new names and arrange in connected classifications the facts which they in a great degree had been the instruments of bringing to light. The labours of men of genius, however erroneously directed, scarcely ever fail in ultimately turning to the solid advantage of mankind. I listened to his statement, which was delivered without any presumption or affectation, and then added that his lecture had removed my prejudices against modern chemists. I expressed myself in measured terms, with the modesty and deference due from a youth to his instructor, without letting escape, inexperience in life would have made me ashamed, any of the enthusiasm which stimulated my intended labours. I requested his advice concerning the books I ought to procure. I am happy, said Mr. Waldman, to have gained a disciple, and if your application equals your ability, I have no doubt of your success. Chemistry is that branch of natural philosophy in which the greatest improvements have been and may be made. It is on that account that I have made it my peculiar study. But at the same time, I have not neglected the other branches of science. A man would make but a very sorry chemist if he attended to that department of human knowledge alone. If your wish is to become really a man of science, and not merely a petty experimentalist, I should advise you to apply to every branch of natural philosophy, including mathematics. Victor Frankenstein likes all science except country and rap. He then took me into his laboratory and explained to me the use of his various machines, instructing me as to what I ought to procure and promising me the use of his own when I should have advanced far enough in the science not to derange their mechanism. He also gave me the list of books which I had requested, and I took my leave. Thus ended a day memorable to me. It decided my future destiny. The end of chapter 3. But they're quite a lot shorter than Dracula chapters or Wuthering Heights chapters, so we're going to carry on to another one. Oh, I've been tired all day because I got woken up early because of Fitz throwing up a hairball. Ugh. Chapter 4. Frankenstein. From this day, natural philosophy, and particularly chemistry, in the most comprehensive sense of the term, became nearly my sole occupation. I read with ardour those works so full of genius and discrimination which modern inquirers have written on these subjects. I attended the lectures and cultivated the acquaintance of the men of science of the university, and I found even in Mr. Kremp a great deal of sound sense and real information, combined, it is true, with a repulsive physiognomy and manners, but not on that account the less valuable. The physiognomy is the way he looks. Oh, Victor Frankenstein is a low-down bitch. Oh, yeah. No, I mean, Victor loves his sister/fiancée, Elizabeth, but he doesn't go on and on about how smart and affectionate and hot she is all the time. He's just like, oh, also Elizabeth was there, and we were all really glad because it's nice to have a girl there sometimes. It's a much better book than I remember. In Mr. Waldman, I found a true friend. His gentleness was never tinged by dogmatism, and his instructions were given with an air of frankness and good nature that banished every idea of pedantry. In 1,000 ways, he smoothed for me the path of knowledge and made the most abstruse inquiries clear and facile to my apprehension. My application was at first fluctuating and uncertain. It gained strength as I proceeded, and soon became so ardent and eager that the stars often disappeared in the light of morning, whilst I was yet engaged in my laboratory. As I applied so closely, it may be easily conceived that my progress was rapid. My ardour was indeed the astonishment of the students, and my proficiency that of the masters. Professor Crimp often asked me with a sly smile how Cornelius Agrippa went on, whilst Mr. Waldman expressed the most heartfelt exultation at my progress. I loved him and I smooched his desk every single day. It's not in the text, but it is implied. 2 years passed in this manner, during which I paid no visit to Geneva, but was engaged heart and soul in the pursuit of some discoveries which I hoped to make. None but those who haven't experienced them can conceive of the enticements of science. In other studies, you go as far as others have gone before you, and there is nothing more to know. But in a scientific pursuit, there is continual food for discovery and wonder. Oh, Lizzie's barely erect at all. Waste of space. A mind of moderate capacity, which closely pursues one study, must infallibly arrive at great proficiency in that study. And I, who continually sought the attainment of one object of pursuit and was solely wrapped up in this, improved so rapidly that at the end of 2 years I made some discoveries in the improvement of some chemical instruments, which procured me great esteem and admiration at the university. When I had arrived at this point and had become as well acquainted with the theory and practice of natural philosophy as depended on the lessons of any of the professors at Ingolstadt, my residence there being no longer conducive to my improvements, I thought of returning to my friends in my native town, when an incident happened that protracted my stay. Did it happen while you were kissing your teacher's desk, Victor? It's fine. Like, we've all been 17. We've all smooched the professor's desk, I guess. I mean, I haven't, but all my professors were ugly, so. One of the phenomena which had peculiarly attracted my attention was the structure of the human frame, and indeed any animal endued with a life. Whence, I often asked myself, did the principle of life proceed? It was a bold question, and one which has ever been considered as a mystery. Yet with how many things are we upon the brink of becoming acquainted, if cowardice or carelessness did not restrain our inquiries? I resolved these circumstances in my mind and determined thenceforth to apply myself more particularly to those branches of natural philosophy which relate to physiology. Unless I had been animated by an almost supernatural enthusiasm, my application to this study would have been irksome and almost intolerable. To examine the causes of life, we must first have recourse to death. I became acquainted with the science of anatomy, but this was not sufficient. I must also observe the natural decay and corruption of the human body. In my education, my father had taken the greatest precautions that my mind should be impressed with no supernatural horrors. I do not remember ever to have trembled at a tale of superstition, or to have feared the apparition of a spirit. Darkness had no effect upon my fancy, and a churchyard was to me merely the receptacle of bodies deprived of life, which, from being the seat of beauty and strength, had become food for the worm. Now I was led to examine the cause and progress of this decay, and forced to spend days and nights in vaults and charnel houses. My attention was fixed upon every object the most insupportable to the delicacy of the human feelings. I never heard a ghost story in my life, and that's why I decided to make a Frankenstein, because I didn't know it was wrong. Parents, talk to your children about making Frankensteins, or someone else will. Also, just say no to making a Frankenstein. Yeah. I saw how the fine form of man was degraded and wasted. I beheld the corruption of death succeed the blooming cheek of life. I saw how the worm inherited the wonders of the eye and brain. I paused, examining and analysing all the minutiae of causation, as exemplified in the change from life to death, and death to life, until from the midst of this darkness a sudden light broke in upon me. A light so brilliant and wondrous, yet so simple, that while I became dizzy with the immensity of the prospect which it illustrated, I was surprised that among so many men of genius who had directed their inquiries towards the same science, that I alone should be reserved to discover so astonishing a secret. Yeah, if an older girl says that you have to make a Frankenstein with them behind the bike sheds at school, say no thanks. That's for losers, and I'm a winner. I would rather smoke a tobacco cigarette, which at the time when this book was written was still probably good for you. It was before they put chemtrails in the tobacco, which I don't really have time to get into that. I don't want this video taken down. Remember, I am not recording the vision of a madman. The sun does not more certainly shine in the heavens than that which I now affirm is true. Some miracle might have produced it, yet the stages of the discovery were distinct and probable. After days and nights of incredible labour and fatigue, I succeeded in discovering the cause of generation and life. Nay, more, I became myself capable of bestowing animation upon lifeless matter. I made my sausages dance. Mrs. Miggins brought me my tea, and I said, Mrs. Miggins, I can make my sausages dance. It's what I've dreamt of since I was but a wee lad, and now I can go home to Papa and show him how the sausages dance. Nope, sorry, that was a whole wrong paragraph. That wasn't. Nope, not in there. Peculiar. The astonishment which I had at first experienced on this discovery soon gave place to delight and rapture, after so much time spent in painful labour. To arrive at once at the summit of my desires was the most gratifying consummation of my toils. But this discovery was so great and overwhelming that all the steps by which I had been progressively led to it were obliterated, and I beheld only the result. What had been the study and desire of the wisest men since the creation of the world was now within my grasp. Not that, like a magic scene, it all opened upon me at once. The information I had obtained was of a nature rather to direct my endeavours so soon as I should point them towards the object of my search, than to exhibit that object already accomplished. I was like the Arabian who had been buried with the dead and found a passage to life, aided only by one glimmering and seemingly ineffectual light. I wonder how he found this out. Did he do it? Did he make a cat run around? I guess he's going to tell us. I see by your eagerness and wonder and hope which your eyes express, my friend, that you expect to be informed of the secret with which I am acquainted. That cannot be. Listen patiently until the end of my story, and you will easily perceive why I am reserved upon that subject. I will not lead you on, unguarded and ardent as I then was, to your destruction and infallible misery. Learn from me, if not by my precepts, at least by my example, how dangerous is the acquirement of knowledge, and how much happier that man is who believes his native town to be the world, than he who aspires to become greater than his nature will allow. Thought I heard a cat. When I found so astonishing a power placed within my hands, I hesitated a long time concerning the manner in which I should employ it. Although I possess the capacity of bestowing animation, yet to prepare a frame for the reception of it, with all its intricacies of fibres, muscles, and veins, still remained a work of inconceivable difficulty and labour. I doubted at first whether I should attempt the creation of a being like myself, or one of simpler organisation. But my imagination was too much exalted by my first success to permit me to doubt of my ability to give life to an animal as complex and wonderful as man. The materials at present within my command hardly appeared adequate to so arduous an undertaking, but I doubted not that I should ultimately succeed. I prepared myself for a multitude of reverses. My operations might be incessantly baffled, and at last my work be imperfect. Yet when I considered the improvement which every day takes place in science and mechanics, I was encouraged to hope my present attempts would at least lay the foundations of future success. Nor could I consider the magnitude and complexity of my plan as any argument of its impracticability. Oh yeah, no, chat. Absolutely, chat. Lets me know I'm still online. I wouldn't call him a necromancer. He's like a science mancer. Yeah. He's a lightning mage. It was with these feelings that I began the